Hey everybody. Today what we're going to be discussing is what is known to history as the Overland Campaign. In spring of 1864, President Lincoln was considering his options on how best to defeat General Lee and his Army of Northern Virginia and to defeat the South. And he put a new commander over all Union armies, General Ulysses Grant. He'd be given the title of general, which no other officer had held since the time of George Washington. He had full command over all the armies. And he was sharing his ideas with Lincoln and plotting this offensive for 1864. He said that he had an idea to launch major attacks against all major Confederate points at the exact same time. And also the most important part was he promised Lincoln that he was not going to retreat. What the importance of that promise was, every year in 1861, he sent the Union Army south. It got completely obliterated in the Battle of Bull Run. Got sent up north. Second year in 1862, it got obliterated at the Battle of Second Bull Run or Second Manassas, and also later at the Battle of Fredericksburg, and that was the end of that. And the following year in 1863, the Union Army got obliterated at the Battle of Chancellorsville and got sent north. So Lee had a long list of defeated enemies in terms of Union generals, and the fact that Grant was telling President Lincoln, "I'm not going to retreat," was a very big deal. And so they march into Virginia, and they go to an area that's known as the Wilderness. It's an area closest about north of Spotsylvania Courthouse, just west of Chancellorsville and Fredericksburg. Pardon me, the general area that the Battle of Chancellorsville had been fought the year before. And hostilities open up on May the 5th. And it's pretty intense fighting on both sides. There's attacks, counterattacks, and major losses, major attacks. And what happened at one point, things got so hectic on the first day, that Lee was concerned that the men were retreating, and he was worried for a while that he was going to have to step in and stop the retreat himself. And he was worried he'd have to go up to the front line to take care of this. And Lee was dangerously close to the front line, and everyone was yelling, "Lee to the rear, Lee to the rear," because I mean, he's within sight of the Yankee sharpshooters. And so finally, at what point, Longstreet's corps, who was in the back, comes up, and a Texas brigade comes up to that area, and a sergeant from that group actually grabs Lee's horse, Traveler, by the reins, drags him to the rear, and tells Lee to stay put. Can't imagine telling the commanding officer or something like that, but it was a little humorous note. And the Texas boys and the rest of Lee's Longstreet's corps was able to help balance the line out. It still became a horrible stalemate. But the thing is, around that same time, no sooner than Longstreet had taken the field, there was a confusion between the Confederate lines, and he got between them, and he accidentally got shot by his own men. Much similar the way to, kind of similar to how Jackson got shot the year before, shot by his own men by friendly fire. So he didn't die. He would basically be out until fall of that year. But the fact is, Lee had just lost one of his most reliable officers while this was going on, because what had happened was a year before, Jackson, got mortally wounded at the Battle of Chancellorsville in 1863, and then he didn't die from the wound, but he died 8 days later from pneumonia. And then he had Longstreet fall almost in the exact same spot. Longstreet's going up for medical care. He'll be out for who knows how long. And his other Confederate cavalry officers, General Stewart, what happens is Union cavalry officer Phil Sheridan asked for permission from Grant to go after General Stewart, which is pretty much what they did. So they went and at the Battle Yellow Tavern a week later. The Union cavalry faces against Confederate cavalry, and Jeb Stuart is mortally wounded. And so there were many reliable officers in the Army of Northern Virginia, or else they wouldn't have been able to function. But the three specific generals that Lee had relied on through most of 1862 into 63 was General Longstreet of the First Corps, General Stonewall Jackson, who commanded the Second Corps, and General Jeb Stuart of the Cavalry. And within 13 months, he had lost all three of them, 2 to death and 1 to being incapacitated. And so the battle continued, but the other officers stepped up, and the battle continued, and the stalemate was so bad that they weren't even able to reclaim their wounded and their dead from the thick forest. And also there was a fire in the area, and so many of the men in both north and south had to listen in horror while many of their wounded mates were consuming in the fire, or even worse, were being eaten alive by the wild boars in the area. And the next day, the battle resumes again. It keeps going back and forth. Finally, ends to a complete and total stalemate. Lee is anticipating a withdrawal. The Yankee army went their licked and go back north. So Grant, on the cover of darkness, Grant orders a withdrawal on the 7th. But what he does is something that surprises everyone involved. He, instead of heading north, he heads south. He heads south to go to the area of Spotsylvania Courthouse. That astounded everybody because his men were so used to go, oh, great, we got beat again. Now back up to Washington for how many months? And it's just morale was down the tubes. And then they saw they were heading south, saying, no, we were not defeated. We're heading south to continue the fight. That just gave a major, major boost to the Union Army. And Lee was shocked because this is the first officer that didn't back down to him. I mean, Meade didn't back down to him either, but that was Gettysburg. That was a whole different set of circumstances. But the fact that Grant was continuing the attack, and this would go on throughout all of May and most of June, it wound up ending up claiming over 80,000 lives, one of the biggest losses of life, both North and South. But his whole point was to destroy the Army of Northern Virginia. He was not able to completely do that, but what he did was he pushed him far enough to where Lee was forced into the defenses of Richmond, which is something he'd been desperately trying to avoid for a long time because Lee's mobility and able to get around Union positions and hit them from the side, hit them from places they don't expect, that was one of his major keys to success. And Grant, by forcing him into the defenses outside of Richmond in Petersburg, that took that main element away from Lee, where Lee was not able to do anything but defend anymore. And while Grant was getting stronger, Lee was getting weaker. So at this point, Lee was in a very difficult position now, trying to have to defend, being able to really take on his opponent, to having to defend the line between Richmond and Petersburg. So more on that to come.